In 1984, there was this deeply frustrated doctor who walked right into his lab, grabbed a Petri dish that was just swirling with this cloudy, foul-smelling culture of live bacteria.
And he just drank it like a shot.
Literally just tossed it back. He deliberately gave himself this incredibly painful gastric disease, all just to prove a point to the medical establishment about human anatomy.
Which is, I mean, it's arguably one of the most methodologically wild, brilliantly unhinged moments in the entire history of science.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, no ethics board on the planet would approve that today, obviously. But it completely revolutionized our understanding of the human gut.
And we're going to find out exactly why he did that today in this deep dive. Because, usually when you look at a medical chart or you hear a doctor rattle off a diagnosis, it doesn't really sound like this thrilling story of scientific rebellion.
Right. It sounds more like an alien language.
Exactly. You see a word that's like 25 letters long, totally unpronounceable, just this imposing wall of consonants and vowels that feels like it's specifically designed to keep you out of the loop.
Yeah, to sound as intimidating as possible.
Right. But today, for you listening, our mission is to decode that alien language. We're going straight into the belly of the beast, literally. We're focusing on the upper GI tract.
The plumbing, basically.
The plumbing. We're isolating just 3 foundational roots from this massive stack of anatomical history. So we're looking at esophago, gastro, and duodenal.
And what's crucial to understand right up front is that we aren't just like memorizing a vocabulary list here. I think that's the biggest misconception about medical terminology.
It's just rote memorization.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
People think it's flashcards. But we are actually unlocking a combinatorial superpower. It operates almost exactly like a Lego set.
Oh, I love that analogy.
Right, because once you identify what the individual plastic bricks are, you can just snap them together to describe an entire anatomical pathway. Or a really complex surgery, all in a single word.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because before we can start snapping these Lego chunks together, we really have to look at where the pieces actually came from. You might assume this is all modern science, but we're talking absolute antiquity here.
Oh, yeah. Thousands of years ago.
Right. So let's start with the first 2 structures food hits when you swallow, esophago and gastro. Now, gastro is, it's fairly straightforward. It pulls straight from the ancient Greek word gaster, which just means belly or stomach.
Yeah, which was literally just an everyday word for them, long before anyone decided to put it in a medical textbook.
Just normal conversation.
Exactly. But the term esophago, though, is it's much more descriptive. That one appears in the Hippocratic corpus, which dates way back to the 5th and 4th centuries BCE.
And that's from the island of Kos, right?
Right, exactly. And the construction of the word comes from oiso, which means I will carry, and phagein, which means to eat. So you put those together, and it literally translates to that which carries what is eaten.
That which carries what is eaten. I mean, I love the absolute utility of that. It's the muscular tube connecting your throat to your stomach, and the Greeks just named it purely for its mechanical function.
Yeah, very literal. But then we hit the third piece of the puzzle, which is the duodenum, or duodenal.
Right. The very first, shortest segment of the small intestine, right downstream from the stomach.
Exactly. And the origin story for this one is incredibly specific. Because to find it, we have to fast forward from Hippocrates to around 300 BCE in Alexandria, Egypt.
Okay.
So there was this anatomist named Herophilus, and he's often referred to as the father of anatomy.
That's a big title.
It is. But the reason he earned it is that Ptolemaic Egypt actually allowed him to perform systematic human dissection.
Well, which was a huge deal back then, right?
Massive. For religious and cultural reasons, that practice was strictly banned almost everywhere else in the ancient world.
So wait, instead of just, guessing what was inside a human based on cutting open a pig or a monkey, he actually gets to open up a human body and look?
He actually gets to look.
Yeah.
And when Herophilus examined the human small intestine, he noticed this very distinct, really short first segment immediately following the stomach. Like, it didn't look like the rest of the winding, lower intestine.
Stood out.
Yeah. So he measured it. And it was consistently about the length of 12 finger widths. So he simply named it dodecadactylon, which is just Greek for 12 fingers.
Which is such a brilliantly practical image, like the father of anatomy just holding up his hands inside a cadaver to measure an organ, and the name just sticks.
It completely stuck for millennia. Centuries later, you had scholars translating those Greek texts into Latin, and they rendered 12 fingers as duodenum digitorum.
Okay, so that's where the Latin comes in.
Right. But, doctors are perpetually busy people, so over time, they just chopped off the second word and left us with duodenum.
Wow.
Yeah, that casual, finger-measured nickname has survived over 2,000 years of medical revisions.
Oh, wait, hold on. The math isn't quite adding up here for me.
Yeah.
If these root words, gastro, esophago, duodeno, if they're over 2 millennia old, were ancient Greeks really walking around dropping, like, 20-letter medical tongue twisters at the apothecary?
That is the essential distinction here. No, they weren't.
Okay, good.
The individual Lego pieces are ancient, but the instruction manual for snapping them together, that's surprisingly modern. The ancient Greeks definitely weren't chaining them into these massive compound words.
So when did that start?
The systematic practice of building medical terminology like taking a root, adding a connecting vowel, and slapping on a suffix that wasn't formalized until the 19th century.
Ah, okay. So doctors essentially took ancient Greek and Latin vocabulary words and just invented a brand new grammar for them in the 1800s.
Precisely. It was this massive push to standardize medical education globally. It really kicked off with the Basel Nomina Anatomica in 1895.
Which sounds very official.
Oh, very. And it went through various iterations until we got the Terminologia Anatomica in 1998, which is the international standard today. So when a medical student learns this word-building system today, they're actually learning a modern convention wrapped in ancient vocabulary.
So let's look at how that modern grammar of the gut actually maps the human body. Like, what are the 19th century rules for this Lego set?
Sure. So the basic formula relies on 3 components. First is the root, which gives you the body part like Esophag, Gastr, Duoden.
Got it.
Second is the combining vowel, and in medical terminology, this is almost always an O. Think of that O as like the little plastic nub on top of the Lego brick that lets you click the next piece on.
The connector piece.
Exactly. And finally, you attach a suffix, which dictates the action or the condition. So, esophagus means inflammation, ephoscopy means the process of viewing with a camera, and esophectomy is surgical removal.
Are there any exceptions to that rule?
The only real caveat is if your suffix starts with a vowel, you drop that connecting O just to make it pronounceable.
Right. Otherwise, you'd have too many vowels clashing.
Yeah.
Let's test this with an example that you listening might be intimately familiar with. GERD.
Oh, yeah. Very common.
Gastroesophageal reflux disease. The American College of Gastroenterology estimates something like 20% of U.S. adults suffer from weekly reflux symptoms, which is huge.
It is huge.
And when we break down that first word, gastroesophageal, we are taking gastro and clicking it right into esophago. And just by combining those two pieces, the word perfectly encodes the problem.
It really does.
Because it identifies the two specific organs, and it implies the abnormal backward direction of the acid flowing from the stomach up into the esophagus.
It's incredibly efficient. And the utility scales up, too, when we look at diagnostic procedures. Like, take the standard diagnostic camera test for the upper GI tract, an EGD, or esophagogastroduodenoscopy.
Man, I always picture a word like EGD as a literal subway map for a gastroenterologist's flexible camera.
A subway map? Yeah, that's a great way to look at it.
Right, because if you read the word from left to right, it gives you the exact sequence of the stops on the train line.
Exactly.
You board at the mouth and hit esophago, traveling down the throat tube. Next stop, gastro. The train pulls into the cavern of the stomach. Final stop, duodeno. You push through the exit doors into the duodenum. And that suffix, endoscopy, tells you exactly what the train is doing at every single stop. It's viewing the tissue.
That analogy tracks perfectly with clinical practice because the word prevents any ambiguity. If a doctor orders an EGD, the surgical team knows exactly how far the instrument is traveling and what tissues need to be examined along that specific route.
Now, mapping the gut with words is obviously great for a diagnosis, right, for running the camera down the tracks. But it becomes literally a matter of life and death when a surgeon needs to reroute those tracks.
Oh, completely.
And to understand how that works, we need to quickly introduce a few of the neighboring stations. So upstream of our main trio, you have pharyngo, which is the throat.
Right.
At the very exit of the stomach, there's a muscular valve called the pylorus, or pyloro. And immediately downstream of the duodenum is the next major segment of the small intestine, the jejunum, or jejuno.
And those neighbors are the absolute key to understanding one of the most monumental surgical breakthroughs in history. This was courtesy of an Austrian surgeon named Theodor Billroth.
Okay, what did Billroth do?
Well, in 1881, working in Vienna, Billroth performed the first successful surgical removal of a cancerous stomach.
Wow.
Yeah, before this, stomach cancer was basically a death sentence because no one knew how to safely remove the organ and then, put the plumbing back together without it leaking.
Which would be catastrophic.
Lethal.
Hmm.
But Bill Roth removed the diseased lower portion of the stomach, and then he managed to reconnect the remaining healthy stomach directly to the duodenum.
Okay, let's run that through our Lego system real quick. He took the stomach, gastro, added the duodenum, duodeno, and the suffix for creating a new opening is estomy. So he performed a gastroduodenostomy,
You got it.
which eventually became known as the Bill Roth eye procedure.
A textbook execution of the terminology. But the real genius of the combinatorial system and of Bill Roth's surgical logic happened 4 years later in 1885.
What happened then?
He encountered these severe cases where the duodenum couldn't safely be used for the reconnection. The tissue was either too damaged by ulcers or the cancer had just spread too far down.
So he couldn't use it.
Right. He had to reroute the plumbing further down the line. He completely skipped the duodenum and attached the remaining stomach directly to the jejunum.
Okay, so if we follow the Lego rules,
Yeah.
he bypassed the duodenum, he took the stomach, gastro, and attached it to the jejuno.
Yeah.
So he built a gastroduodenostomy.
You nailed it. That became known as the Bill Roth II.
What absolutely blows my mind about this is that by swapping out one single vocabulary root, just replacing duodeno with jejunum, you were describing a fundamentally different architectural plan for a human being's digestive tract.
And this isn't just like trivia from the 1880s. If we connect this to the bigger picture, this logic is used every single day.
Wait, really? Today?
Oh, yeah. Modern weight loss surgeries like the Roux-en-Y gastric bypass, which treats severe obesity and metabolic disease, those are direct descendants of Bill Roth's plumbing reroutes.
Oh, wow.
The whole concept of a bypass relies on swapping these routes. You're intentionally skipping sections of the gut to reduce how many calories the body absorbs.
It is wild that a grammatical system formalized in the 19th century is still perfectly equipped to describe cutting-edge 21st century bariatric surgeries.
It really is.
But going back to Bill Roth for a second, he was operating on end-stage stomach issues, right? Things like massive ulcers that had eaten right through the organ.
Yeah.
And for a very long time, the medical establishment thought they had the cause of those ulcers completely figured out.
They were so sure.
Until our friend from the beginning of the deep dive decided to drink a beaker of bacteria.
Yes. This is truly one of the most dramatic paradigm shifts in gastroenterology. Because for the vast majority of the 20th century, the unquestioned dogma was that gastric and duodenal ulcers were caused by a combination of stress, spicy foods, and excess stomach acid.
Which, to be fair, makes intuitive sense to people.
Right. Acid burns tissue. So the prescribed treatment was drinking heavy cream, eating bland diets, popping antacids, or in severe cases, undergoing major surgeries like the ones Bill Roth invented, just to cut the acid-producing sections out.
Yeah. If you were a high-powered executive in the 1970s and you complained of stomach pain, your doctor literally told you to drink a glass of milk and just calm down.
Yeah.
That was the extent of the science.
Exactly. And the market for acid-suppressing drugs was astronomical. But then, in 1982, two Australian physicians in Perth, Barry Marshall and Robin Warren, found something completely anomalous. They identified a tiny spiral-shaped bacterium living directly in the highly acidic environment of the stomach lining, which we now know as Helicobacter pylori.
H. pylori.
Right. And they boldly proposed that this bacterium, not stress, was actually the primary driver of ulcers.
And the mainstream medical community basically laughed them right out of the room.
Oh, they ridiculed them.
Because the established physiological rule was that stomach acid was so highly concentrated, it effectively sterilized the organ. The idea that a bacteria could just set up camp in a vat of acid sounded completely absurd to gastroenterologists at the time.
It did sound impossible, but what the medical community didn't know yet was how the bacteria survived.
How does it?
H. pylori has this fascinating survival mechanism where it secretes an enzyme that creates a little localized alkaline bubble of ammonia around itself.
Oh, wow, like a little shield?
Exactly. It essentially neutralizes the acid in its immediate zip code, which allows it to burrow safely into the stomach lining. But, Marshall couldn't persuade his skeptical colleagues of this, and he couldn't prove it with standard animal models because the bacterium didn't seem to infect the lab animals in the same way it did humans.
Which leads us to 1984. Frustrated, unable to secure funding or belief, Barry Marshall walks into his lab, takes a Petri dish loaded with a cloudy broth of pure H. pylori, and just drinks it.
Yep. And within days of downing that culture, Marshall developed severe gastritis. He was vomiting, exhausted, in massive pain.
Awful.
But crucially, he proved his own illness by having his stomach examined via endoscopy, showing the active inflammation. And then, the true mic drop, he cured himself by taking a simple course of antibiotics.
That is amazing. He manufactured a debilitating disease inside his own body just to prove he could turn it off with an antibiotic instead of an antacid.
That visceral, undeniable proof is what finally tipped the scales. Now, it took another decade of accumulating clinical evidence, but eventually, global treatment guidelines completely shifted.
Right.
Duodenal ulcers went from being managed as chronic, lifelong afflictions treated with expensive acid suppressants or invasive surgeries to being treated as a curable bacterial infection.
That's a massive win for patient quality of life.
Massive. And by 2005, Marshall and Warren were actually awarded the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine.
You know, that entire saga proves how radically our understanding of the upper GI tract can change. But surprisingly, there is still an ongoing debate today about what the upper GI tract actually is.
Yeah, it's a bit messy.
Because the duodenum seems to cause a bit of an anatomical boundary dispute. Does it genuinely belong in this trio of esophago, gastro, and duodenum?
Well, that depends entirely on whether you are talking to a clinician or an embryologist.
Okay, break that down.
Clinically, as we discussed with the EGD procedure, the duodenum is absolutely grouped into the upper GI. The functional definition for a doctor is simply, can I reach it with an endoscope going down through the mouth? If yes, it's upper GI.
Makes sense.
Right.
But embryologically, like the way the human body actually develops in the womb, it is a totally different story.
Exactly. When a fetus is developing, the gut doesn't just grow as one long, continuous garden hose. It develops in distinct sections that eventually crash together and fuse.
Oh, interesting.
So embryologically, the duodenum is split right down the middle by a tiny landmark called the major duodenal papilla. The top half of the duodenum above that mark develops from what's called the embryonic foregut,
Okay.
but the bottom half below that mark develops from the embryonic midgut. There is a literal weld line right in the middle of the organ. No other single GI organ straddles that developmental boundary.
That split identity of the duodenum is a perfect example of how medical language can trick you. The upper GI label is really just an anatomical convenience for doctors holding flexible cameras, not a strict biological category.
Exactly. It's functional, not developmental.
And actually, there are a few other massive traps people fall into with these terms every day. Let's clear up some rapid-fire misconceptions for the listener before we go. First up, gastric does not equal abdomen.
Yes, huge one.
When someone says, "Oh, my stomach hurts," they usually wave their hand over their entire lower torso. But in medical terms, gastro strictly refers to the pouch-like stomach organ itself.
Right. If a doctor is referring to the general abdominal cavity, they will use entirely different roots, like abdomino or the paro, which you see in the word laparoscopy. The stomach is just one specific organ housed inside that much larger cavity.
Okay, next misconception. The cardia of the stomach has absolutely nothing to do with the heart,
Zero connection.
which is a massive etymological trap.
Yeah.
The region of the stomach just below the esophagus is called the cardia. So you hear cardiac, you naturally think heart. Why on earth did ancient anatomists name a part of the stomach after the heart?
Purely due to geographical proximity. In the early days of anatomy, internal boundaries weren't perfectly mapped. The stomach's cardia sits just across the thin membrane of the diaphragm from the heart. So they share the same ancient Greek root, cardia, but there is no functional relationship whatsoever.
Good to know. Third one. We mentioned earlier that duodenum translates to 12 fingers. So is the organ exactly 12 inches long?
Not at all. Herophilus using his fingers was a brilliant ancient approximation, but it's not an exact spec.
Right.
The adult duodenum actually measures roughly 25 to 30 centimeters, which translates to about 10 to 12 inches. So it's remarkably close, but you definitely wouldn't use it as a precise modern measurement.
Fair enough. And finally, tying back to our camera procedures,
Uh.
EGD versus colonoscopy. Patients constantly mix these up when scheduling them.
Oh, all the time. EGD and colonoscopy explore entirely different tracks of the subway system, to use your analogy. An EGD is the northbound train, so to speak. It goes in through the mouth to examine the upper GI tract down to the duodenum. A colonoscopy is the southbound train. It goes in through the rectum to examine the large intestine. They approach from opposite ends of the body.
So if we look back at the journey we've taken today, we started with ancient Greek philosophers naming the tubes in our throat, and anatomists in Alexandria using their fingers as tape measures. We saw how 19th century doctors took those ancient words and built a combinatorial Lego set, a grammar that acts as a literal readable map of the human body.
A very functional map.
And we saw that map guided surgical pioneers like Bill Roth and was later revolutionized by a Nobel Prize-winning doctor willing to drink a beaker of bacteria to overthrow decades of dogma.
You know, the takeaway for you listening is that this isn't just dusty ancient history.
Not at all.
Whether you are picking up an over-the-counter medication to treat daily heartburn from GERD, or scheduling a routine EGD to check on an ulcer, or taking a short course of antibiotics because of Barry Marshall's discovery, you are interacting directly with these ancient roots. Every time you read a medical chart, you are looking at millennia of anatomical breakthroughs stacked right on top of each other.
It really changes how you look at a doctor's chart. But it does leave me with one final thought to ponder. If this incredibly stable 2,300-year-old Lego set of Greek and Latin roots was built specifically to map the macroscopic anatomical structures we can physically see with our eyes, like the tubes, the sacs, the valves, what happens as modern technology allows us to intervene at the microscopic or even the genetic level?
That's a great question.
Right, things like CRISPR gene editing or targeted immunotherapies. Will our ancient naming system eventually run out of pieces to describe the invisible new frontiers of the human body? Or will we just keep stacking those blocks higher, building longer and longer words, until that medical chart truly does look like an alien language?